So I think most of us have been introduced several times. So what I thought we'd do is start with Amy and let Amy talk and introduce. First of all, she should introduce herself a bit because I don't think we've had a chance to talk to her much. And then she could say a little bit about this topic, and then other people can say some things, and we can open it up. Okay.
So I guess my name is Amy Herring, or I know that. I'm professor of biostatistics at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. In terms of the topic, ooh, there we go. Sorry, okay, I have to hold it really far away because I project well. At UNC, the reason I'm late actually is I'm on the university-wide appointments, promotions, and tenure committee, and I'm the chair-elect actually as of yesterday, so that was exciting. So it's good I didn't bail on that meeting like I thought about, or maybe that's bad. I don't know. It's a big service job, but it's fun. And so I guess to talk a little bit about the topic, I can get us started by talking maybe about the structure of the tenure process at most institutions. And I guess my bias at UNC is a Research One institution, so it may be a little different from some of the other institutions, but I think some things are in common. And so in particular, this starts at the department level, and in many ways that's the most important level. That's often where people get turned down the most frequently. So in our department, external letters of recommendation are sought, and then once the package is together along with those external letters, it goes before a vote. In some departments, it's only the full professors. That's the case in ours. In other departments, it's everybody at a higher rank votes. Assuming that vote is positive, then the package, in our case, goes to the School of Public Health, or if you were...
Say what goes in the package.
Yeah, so the package, yeah. So the package would have your CV in it, which, of course, has all your publications. It has, depends on the university, but some sort of teaching statement or teaching portfolio. We have an extensive teaching portfolio that's, maybe 20, 30 pages long of exams you've given. UNC likes to see all of your quantitative course evaluations in addition to peer evaluations of your teaching that are more qualitative. Then you'll have a research statement. You'll have maybe 3 research papers at UNC that go out in the package. And then the external letters of support. And usually what happens at most schools is that the candidate gives some names and the department picks some names. And so there's a mix of letters which are identified as the candidate's letters versus the department's letters. And what I've learned on the UNC-wide committee for tenure is that almost always it's actually the chair's letters that are nicer than the candidate's letters. So the candidates often do a very poor job of picking people to write letters. So anyway, a lot of the negative letters are ones the candidates pick. But anyway, assuming you get approved at the departmental level, you'll go to a school level. So like the College of Arts and Sciences, if you're in a math or stat department, or in our case, it's the School of Public Health. And then there'll be another vote. And then often then it gets accelerated to a university-wide level, So there's usually many different tiers, but I would say maybe most places what's most important is what your colleagues in your department think about you, and in particular what the letters of recommendation that are externally sought say about you and how your colleagues interpret those. If there is something bad, are they going to talk around it? Are they going to provide perspective, on that? And so that's sort of the general, I think, structure. A lot of different places, and I don't want to talk the whole time, so I'll pass along.
Okay. Well, I'm at Western Carolina University, which is still part of the same system as Chapel Hill. But we're a regional comprehensive university, and so our focus is some of everything. And as you heard what I was talking about, my publications are all over the place. And we have the standard teaching, research, and service. I would say if your teaching is not good enough, you're not even going to get to tenure. You won't be reappointed well before then. So usually the question is, do you have enough research? And with us, it's peer-reviewed of some sort. So we put a packet together, just like you were describing. We actually don't require external letters at all. And when I went up for tenure, I didn't have any. When I went up for full professor, I did do external letters because my department had suggested it. But since I wasn't in such a narrowly focused field, I actually suggested 4 people, and I know those are the 4 people that wrote the letter, and I just know it was anonymous. I didn't see what they wrote, but I know who they were. But it wasn't required. That was just to make the record stronger. But we put in a big packet like you described. We have a standard format that you have to fill out, and you're listing all your publications, all your presentations, all the teaching ideas that you've done as well. So the whole thing is together. I've never heard of anybody not getting tenure over lack of service. Although if you're not a team player, you probably also would not have been reappointed early on. But it's usually a publication issue. And we have a similar structure that goes to a department committee. For us, it's an elected committee, actually, in the department. And then the department head, and then the college committee, and the dean, and then the university committee, and then the provost, and then the chancellor, and then the state board of governors. So it it would probably be similar at Chapel Hill in that sense. So it goes through all these processes, and you kind of hear, it takes a year to hear what's going on. Yeah, you hear the next, oh, it went through the next level. That's great. For tenure, I would say with us, if it gets through the college committee, you're pretty good. For full professor, it's often knocked down at the university level. But that's just the main structure, and of course we can say more as there's questions.
Okay, and so at Georgia Tech, I guess what I want to say about tenure is that the overall structure at almost every university is similar, and the devil is of course in the details, and that the most important thing that you need to realize as you're applying for jobs or when you have a job is that you need to understand how tenure works at your particular institution. And so anything that you may have heard about elsewhere just doesn't apply. What matters is what works at your institution. And there are both written rules and there are unwritten rules. And you need to know what both of those are. You need to know very clearly what the written rules are because you need to make sure that they're being followed. But you also need to know what the unwritten rules are so that you make sure that you're meeting all of the unwritten expectations. It's vital that you know how good your department is at getting people through. So if they have a good track record of getting people through, that's great. If their track record is not so good, then you need to be much more proactive about it because there's all sorts of warning signs with that. It's critical to cultivate mentors in your department. And one of the things that's difficult about being a mentor is that it's hard to tell people, it's hard to give people sort of constructive feedback. That's very challenging. It can be emotional, and often senior faculty just don't want to deal. And so it's essential that you cultivate, senior mentors who are going to take the time and expend the energy to really mentor you, not just pat you on the head and tell you things are okay, even if they're not. So those are the sort of things that I think are more broadly applicable as opposed to kind of with the specifics of tenure at Georgia Tech.
Yeah, I would say here at the University of Tennessee, all the tenure faculty vote on the tenure votes for new people coming up for tenure. So, but I do want to say that it is quite different. For example, at East Tennessee State, the teaching load is 2 and 2, like a lot of people have here at Tennessee. Some people have, and they don't take any external letters at East Tennessee State. So it's quite different from many places. But I have one more thing to say is that when you're just beginning your career, I think you should pick your fights carefully. There'll be a lot of things that will irritate you, and you'd like to, raise a big stink about it and get it fixed. But you should think about that you don't want to irritate too many people, and so you should pick your fights carefully. Is this worth, making a big stink? And so you have to think about, don't be a person who's like picking fights about every single thing, because then they won't even listen to you at all. So you have to think about what issues you really care about and be careful about picking fights. So let's, I guess, open this up for questions.
Yes. When you were looking at positions for tenure track positions, did it come up at all in your search or when you were talking to faculty about what guidance was provided in the department for that, and did you consider that in your decision? No.
I think that's really important to know, and it varies greatly from department to department, but I would specifically ask the people who've just gotten tenured, or in particular the assistant professors who are worried about it, specific questions. Do you have a clear understanding of what the expectation is for you to get tenure? Yes, no, and just ask them. And most people will be very honest with you about that. There's no reason for them not to be. Our department, we get made fun of all the time. Our dean told every department in the school to have criteria for salary increases. And so like one of the departments said it'll be based on merit, period. And then our department has like this 20-page system that gives points to everything. Like it's the statistics, you know. And we're mathy and we like to be quantitative. And so we get made fun of for being overly prescriptive. But on the other hand, I loved it as a junior faculty member because I could count up my points. They gave you the expectation. Exceeds expectation, okay? You know, and so I had very specific feedback, you know, and so I think you would ask, you know, how are those things decided? And that's something the chair should be able to tell you when you're hired, you know, and I think you can even get specific, you know, say, for example, I had, you know, 10 papers, is that, you know, but none of them in the top journal, is that bad? Or, you know, I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
Yeah, I actually was asking, you know, what is the track record? How's everybody been doing? And I don't know of anybody in my department that has ever not gotten tenure. And the reason they told me is because they really search out people that they think, when they hire you, they think you can get tenure. And we have a mentor system. Any new faculty member is given a mentor in the department. You can also go through our faculty center and get a mentor outside of the department, which can be useful for when your packet goes up the line so that somebody outside of the College of Arts and Sciences has looked at it and given you feedback so you can get their impression. That's really helpful when you're talking about publications. In fact, when I went up for full professor, my department head said, just go ahead and number them because they're going to count it anyway. And, and outside of the department, they don't know the field. They'll just say, well, it was peer-reviewed. Somebody apparently put their rubber stamp on it. And so, okay, you have this many. Good.
What if you feel like you're getting maybe mixed messages about expectations, especially because people in different positions change, chairs change, this kind of thing? How do you kind of get at what is what?
You're safest if you take the upper bound. I mean, that's the unfortunate reality, but it's true. I guess I need a clearer, I mean, it sounds like you have something more specific in mind.
Not really. I think it's just there's hints of that happen. Sorry. Not really specific. I feel like there's hints of that happening, and I'm wondering, like, do I dig down deeper? How do I deal with that? That kind of thing. And I guess it was in reference to I don't know if in reference to like typically people in your field have more publications than people in this field. And it was like, okay, that was a very unspoken, like the 2 a year then doesn't apply, it does, you know, that kind of thing. So I'm not sure how to deal with instances like that. And I think that might be something on a broader scale too, not just applicable to my specific instance, if that makes sense. Maybe Suzanne can give me direct information. No,
I think it especially here and maybe some other places, sometimes what the department head says is not what some of the senior researchers say, right? Somehow there's a disconnect between sometimes, right? Maybe that's what you feel. So you have to actually, sometimes the department head should not be the only person you get advice from. You need, because a lot of the senior powerful people maybe are not fully behind the department head, right? So it can be very tricky, and I think that's here. It can be a little tricky. So. Yes, but the current department here is So it's a complicated thing to balance, knowing who the power players are, and they might be some other people besides the department heads.
You definitely need to know who the power. I mean, you need to know what the power structure of your department is. Absolutely. And but it's also the case of it's from what you said. It seemed like they're actually maybe applying different standards to you in particular, as opposed to and so and that. And, yeah. So you definitely need to make sure that you understand not just one person's perspective, even if that person is the chair, but you need to make sure that you are sampling, you have a broad enough sample size that to understand what it is, but you also need to make sure that they're in some sense applying them consistently, and so if somehow you're getting the message that they're applying a different standard to you for whatever reasons, then that's something that you do need to resolve.
I think one thing though to remember is that there will be a vote either of the tenured professors or of the full professors, and that vote follows you everywhere. So you're safest if that's, if that's a unanimous vote, that becomes very difficult to reverse at a higher level, and so you want to make everybody happy in some sense, and even though everyone might not always love you, that it doesn't, they don't necessarily vote on love, and so I think at UNC, for example, it's fairly uncommon to see split votes at the department level. I think they tend not to go forward past the department when there's a big difference of opinion and there's a big strong preference to have a consensus from the department to make it a strong case, so the more people who are these power players in research that you worry, people you worry about, I would try to befriend. What my strategy was, I asked the mean person in our department to be on my mentoring committee because I thought at least I'll know the worst possible scenario every year and be reminded of it. And but I'm sort of like that. I want to I want to be at the upper bound and not so you think about things like that. You can ask that person for advice, and it's not going to make them that angry with you. If you ask them, look at my CV, do you think I'm on track?
Yeah, getting a good mentor is really helpful. So hopefully when you pick a mentor, it's somebody who actually knows the power plays of the department as well. And yeah, asking the person you think will be the most difficult for advice is a really good play, because once you've just asked them for advice, it's hard for them to turn around and kill you and really hurt you. You also have reviews. Every school's different, but reviews prior to tenure. Actually, when I went through that, we did annual reappointment reviews that were pretty extensive. We do it less now, but still a third-year review or whatever your university does is critical to really see am I on track? Are they telling me I'm still on track? And if they've documented every year that you're on track, you have a solid record going in. And I don't know if this pertains to your question, but like my department is math ed, and computer science and statistics. And even within the department, we have slightly different publication expectations just because of the field. So like our computer scientists, it's most important to be out there doing current presentations more than any articles that are going to be outdated as soon as they're published. So they found information from the computer science societies and put that in there. Our math ed folks, it's similar things. It's really important for them to be presenting, referee, journal. They referee their presentations so that they have information from that society that they include in their documentation that would go up the line. So that's within the department, but even once you talk university-wide, they don't know our field. And of course they don't. It's our job to educate them.
So, since it seems to be the theme of the day from Marianne's little packet, what are some things definitely not to do in a tenure portfolio?
I don't know about the portfolio. It's probably the whole process.
Right. I mean, are there any things that you would say definitely avoid doing that maybe people might want to do? Does that?
Well, you don't want to offend people. You probably don't want to stand up in a faculty meeting and yell at the chancellor in public. There's the obvious kinds of things. You want to make sure that if there's a document that says what you're supposed to be doing, that you've done it, especially if it's in writing. If it says you're supposed to be doing innovative things, make sure you are. If it says you need to publish, well, then you need to publish. If it says presentations are enough, and I know in some teaching schools, professional development is important and that they count that, that's fine. If it's in writing, you can point to it, make sure that the culture of the university actually is the same as the written version. If it's not, you do both.
I mean, I'm not aware of a list of sort of egregious mistakes that are well known. It's sort of each failed tenure case is unique in its own right. Like successful tenure cases are all the same. Failed tenure cases are unique, and but one of the things, I mean, and this is something that Suzanne sort of mentioned, is you do want to. A lot of it, even at some place like Georgia Tech, but certainly at lots of other places, is do they like you? Do they want to keep you around? And that is something that's important that you recognize. And and the sense of if they like you, everything's going to be perceived through a positive filter, and if they don't like you, it's going to be perceived through a negative filter. And so this may be hard to believe, but I almost never said anything in meetings while I was pre-tenured. It was just because I didn't want, it was risky, and I didn't want to take that risk. My hair was a lot longer when it wasn't long by any, it was like down to my chin or something. But again, it was just, I just didn't I wanted to minimize sort of the risk. And those may seem like sort of kind of crazy things to worry about, but it was just I didn't want to, if my hair is really short, is that something that I'm going to have to worry about, or how my colleagues perceive me? And if you're sitting there and if you're thinking like, this is terrible, I wouldn't want to have to worry about that. It's like, that's fine. You don't have to, but you should be aware of the fact that I mean, we are obviously judged by our appearance, we're judged by our behavior, and your colleagues are going to be judging you. And it's important that you understand that, and that you recognize that is, and that's an unwritten component of the tenure process, because they're basically deciding if they want to keep you around indefinitely.
I think some faculty members expect you to be around a lot, like be in your office or be available. In fact, they'll even mention like, oh, so-and-so always has a lot of students in her office and always students waiting in line. But, that's somebody, you take the time to be around and interact with students. And I mean, I think that, being, like, for example, here at University of Tennessee, being a great teacher is not going to get you tenure, but it can just definitely help people's attitude towards you. And so they might not know your research, especially people don't know your research very well. They'll, be thinking you're a good colleague is really important. So some people are going to be, more worried about the research side, but there's a few people that just say, oh, this is a good colleague, great teacher, we should keep this person. So it's you have to balance it out. So somebody had a comment.
I had a question along the kind of in follow-up to this. I'm wondering if any of you, while you were on the tenure track, had to ever stand up for yourself and say, no, I can't teach this extra class. This is beyond what I'm expected to do, and I need to focus on my research so that I will, have what, as far as the service goes, or even the teaching, because in one breath you're saying people need to like you, you don't want to upset the chair, you want to seem like a good colleague, but on the other hand, at the end of the day, you could be the most helpful person, and if you haven't published...
That's not what I'm saying.
I'm
not what I'm saying.
I'm curious if you could maybe give some examples of times where you've walked that line and kind of how that played out.
Yeah, so basically I can think of several examples, and so I'm going to just kind of try to illustrate this by example. So my first year, I was nominated to be a representative, the department's representative to the academic senate, or some ridiculous thing that I should have never been nominated to do. And so I went into my chair, I was like, and because I was like, how can I say no? What am I doing? And so because he was a great chair, took out a red pen, wrote in big letters, no, but thanks, smiley face. So like, excellent. Okay, so I went back and composed the email, the no, but thanks email. At some point, I wasn't even asked whether I wanted to do this. I was just simply put on the chair search committee. And I discovered this because I went to go vote on who the representatives should be, and so had a conniption and went to another senior colleague and basically said, and so he wrote to them and said, excuse me, the last time that we had an assistant professor on this committee, that was an awful experience, and they left Georgia Tech, so I really don't think that we should have assistant professor. But it wasn't coming from me, basically. He also, at some point, the same colleague came to my office at some point to tell me that somebody else was talking about how I should take over running of the REU program, and he had said, no, she does enough. So the best way of sort of saying no is to make sure that you have senior colleagues running interference for you. And it's also the case of, and you want to be sort of, you want to have in your mind what are reasonable standards. And so I decided I should be doing sort of one departmental thing, one institutional thing, and one sort of professional thing, and as an assistant professor. And I had colleagues who said, that's already a lot. And I said, I know that is a lot, but then I have, I'm kind of ticking the box at every level. And so if anybody comes and says to me, can you do something more? I say, I'm sorry, it sounds very interesting. I'm sure, it's very important, but I'm already committed to do blah. And so you have to be protective of your time. And sort of the best way that I know of to do that is to, one, be doing sort of the right amount, and you need to know what the right amount is. You need to sort of pick and choose the things that you're doing so that you maximize their value to you. And then you need to say no nicely to everything else, and you need to make sure that you have senior people who are running interference for you, because that's the best way of saying, and the best way of saying no is to not actually have to say it yourself.
So what happens if you don't get tenure? Or, I mean, does your application get sent back down the line to be revamped? What happens?
I think that varies too. So at the University of North Carolina, you go up in your 5th year, and there's a decision made at the end of that year which gives you another year to either go up a second time or to look for a job. So most places let you go up a second time. I think if you're denied, and then sometimes it's not an outright denial, but maybe they'll send it back and say, there was a negative comment in this letter that the chair didn't address. Can the chair clarify why they're not concerned about this negative comment or something like that? So there's kind of different versions of denial. But if they really absolutely tell you no, then you need to find out exactly why, And I think then you have this frank conversation with your chair about, is it that I need one more paper? Or is it that I've been below average on teaching evaluations, the whole way through at a teaching institution, and so there's no hope, So I think you just want to be sure to have frank discussions with as many people as possible to get their read on whether you need to be looking for jobs in that year or hunkering down, and really trying to get through. And if the department's supportive but think maybe it's just you need a paper or something, then it might be possible to negotiate a teaching release or something like that to give you time to get something like that, finish a project you're working on, get something out the door.
Like I already said, nobody in my department has had that problem, but I do know some people in other departments. And at Western Carolina, you can appeal to the provost, and so you put together a packet of why they just didn't understand, and they really should have given me tenure, and meet with the provost. And in some cases, that did work. And I don't know of anybody who reapplied. Anybody who didn't get through that was on the job market immediately. But you do have a year, so I mean, it's better than some other jobs, right? You have a year to go look for another job. And it can work if the reason was you didn't have enough research, and you can focus on, I really wanted to do a teaching job, and then go to those schools.
I mean, is it unrealistic to think, I almost think about your PhD, if you go to defend your PhD, if you flunk that part, you're kind of did something wrong, right? You should know if you have enough, right? I mean, is it similar to that when you're applying for tenure? You kind of...
Johnny, you should know.
You should know.
But stuff happening, you should know. And so if you're going into the should have a good sense of I'm below, at, or above the prevailing expectations for my institution. But crazy stuff happens, and so it's not. I mean, if you go online and you read there's something called the Tenure Chase papers, and so if you go online and you read that, it's somebody who's writing extensively about his denied tenure case. But you read it and you're like, oh, warning sign, warning sign, warning sign. And he's like, things were fine. And you say, warning sign. But so it is like the defense, and that you should have a good sense of, are the stars aligned? But crazy stuff happens.
Actually, I don't think it's like the defense too much, because really your advisor should know if your dissertation's good enough. But actually, when it comes to the tenure thing, it's sitting on your own shoulders. But I do think there should be warning signs. And I do agree, most places you cannot go up a second time unless you came up early the first time, and then you can come up a second time. But most places you cannot come up 2 times, right? So, yeah.
I know someone. It very much.
Yeah, but it's pretty common that you can't go up a second time. So, but hopefully you get feedback along the way from reviews and your department head and other people. So,
yes, it's something that hasn't really. It's been discussed in other settings, but we haven't really talked here about the critical review. So that's the 3rd year review for us at Georgia Tech, and that is the one that's really, I mean, we do yearly reviews within the department, but the critical review is done by the Promotion and Tenure Committee. It goes to the college, and that is the one where you get kind of a clear signal of, are you on track, are you not on track, or are you really not on track? And and so it's vital that this 3rd year review or critical review, that it's done seriously, and that you really get good feedback from it, because that's the point where you can there's still scope to make corrections. And in my department, so at Georgia Tech, you get ratings that roughly correspond to like A, B, C, and F. So there's no D, but. And I know people who have, and if you get sort of B's or C's, I mean, if you get F, then you're basically out at that point. But if you get B's or C's, then you have to go up for a critical review again the next. I mean, then they start kind of monitoring you much more carefully. And if you get A's, then you're you're left alone pretty much until you decide to go up for tenure. But but really, that's a huge component of the tenure process, and that's where you should get kind of very clear feedback of, do you need that additional publication? Did you think you've been doing a good job at your teaching, but actually, you're not, you're below the average for the institution or something like that. So you should be getting that information on a yearly basis, but the 3rd year review is really that's the point of, am I on track or am I not on track?
yeah. I do think that people leave after the 3rd year review. They see the handwriting on the wall, and they frequently go get another job and are successful and get tenure. So.
Comment and then a related question. So with my 3rd year review, it was a really eye-opener in some areas, specifically the external letters. So I'm in an interdisciplinary field, and I thought it'd be really great to get letters not only from math, but people who are also experimentalists or different things to say how my work has influenced what they do or how they do it. Sounds great, right? But they evaluated me in terms of what their culture was in biology, for instance. So I don't have enough grants to spy out 75% of my salary, whatever. These kinds of things kind of were the summary comments that I was getting. So anyway, it was a good trial run, so to speak, to see when I got for tenure that I would maybe just stick with more math, people doing math bio and that kind of thing. So again, the 3rd year review is a really great place to, and math is, I think, one of the only departments, you can correct me if I'm wrong, Suzanne, that require external letters at your 3rd year review. And so that actually was kind of a pain, but at the same time, it was really cool.
Many places don't get external letters for your 3rd year review. So if they do, that's very if they do, that's very helpful, as you can see. But I think it's not common.
So my question then is, how do you suggest who to pick for your external letters and kind of navigating through that process. And, I have my experience in not picking so well, I guess, but I mean, like I said, it was a trial run. So maybe you could address something like that.
Okay, I'll start. We'll go down the line. So for what I was told was that I needed to submit a list of 6 names, and the committee would choose exactly 3 of them to ask letters from. Six and only 6. I was supposed to submit 6 names. They were going to select, the committee was then going to select 3 of them. So they were basically going to cross off 3 from my list and then write in 3 other ones. So I found this very frustrating because then they had, because I had to commit first, as opposed to they make up a list, I make up a list, and then somehow they're reconciled. But I spoke to the chair. I mean, I discussed this with the chair and I said, so I'm thinking about this person, and he said, that's an obvious person. You can leave that off. You can leave him off your list. I said, I'm thinking about this person. He said, are they a math person? I said, no, it's like math and CS. He's like, well, okay, so maybe. But we had kind of a conversation about it, and he was giving me strategic advice about how to negotiate that. One of my colleagues who was on the P&T committee said, sort of at the spring, aren't there people that you want to invite for the seminar? And I was like, it's a bit late at this point. Thank you. Actually, it's pretty late. They're all quite prominent, but I had contemplated inviting these people, but then realized that I've seen all of them at meetings within the last year. So then he had the list of people. So there are various ways of kind of passing information around. But this comes back to the, basically, does your department want to tenure you, or they don't want to? If they want to tenure you, then you're having the conversation with your chair like this, and you have someone who's your mentor and promoter who's going to be saying, so are there people that you were thinking about? So those, but also I had been thinking about it in the sense, a little bit in the sense of cultivating these, relationships with people to write names. But for me, that was ultimately one of the most stressful aspects of it, because it seemed like it was something in my control. I knew it was something that would make a really big difference, and I didn't know how to do it optimally, and that had really stressed me out.
The other thing is to know what the solicitation letter looks like that comes from your department. So if there's any way that could be shared, because, for example, some universities have a statement in there that says, would this person be granted tenure at your institution? If that's in there, you don't want the letter to come from Yale, where they don't like to tenure people. They like to hire at full. So it's very important to know the language, and so I do suggest sticking with departments that are peer departments, or if you're 100% sure that person at Yale says, yes, I'd love to have her at Yale, great, go for it. But because that's a really strong statement. But I think it's important to stick with peer departments that tenure people like you, but you don't want it to be so far beneath, like at UNC. I mean, we're looking for peer institutions, so we're looking at Michigan, we're looking at Berkeley, we're looking, at places sort of like us, Illinois, and kind of big state school type places. And so I think it's important to get departments of similar stature, also, though, schools of similar stature to your school, and that they value the same things, like if your department really values publications in one specific area over another, you sort of want your letters to be optimally written for that. The other thing is, I think it's really important to have these conversations where you sort of vet names with a senior faculty member, because, I know in our field there's a guy, and he's just the nicest guy on earth, and everybody loves him, and he writes the most honest, brutally honest letters, and you would never want him to write a tenure letter. And he's not mean or anything. He's just really honest, and that's not always good at that time point. So, the chair might say, well, we've seen letters from this woman before, and I might suggest, someone from an institution more like ours, or they might say things like that to kind of guide you. But then they also, the purpose of having 6 is because if we know there's one person on that list that, you know, writes these killer letters, okay, then it's the chair's prerogative. Do I want to keep you or do I want to get rid of you? You know, do I want to have that nasty reviewer? It's on your list. You asked for it, you know, or do I want to protect you from that possibility? So, yeah, is that it? No.
I don't have a lot because actually we don't require external letters, and when I went up for tenure, I didn't have them. And it was not a problem at all. But it did come up when I was going up for full professor, just the conversation of what to do. And my department had recommended well, maybe you give me 6 and I'll pick 3. And I agonized over that for an entire week because I couldn't think of 6 people that could address my survey articles, my complex dynamics, my ergodic theory, and my whatever, teaching papers. So I finally came back, since it wasn't required anyway, I'm like, well, how about I give you 4 names that I know that the 4 of them can overlap all that I've done, they're good names. And he was like, well, yeah, sure, it was great. And it was all successful. But so what you really want to look at is what does your university require, what's the standard, what's the norm, and what's the best way to represent yourself. So I didn't have the standard situation. I mean, most people in my department do the narrowly defined field, which is great, but I don't, and that was fine too. So you just want to find the best way to represent yourself.
I think in some departments, the department head or chair do not pick the names. There's a tenure and promotion committee, or even a tenure committee for that particular person, and they pick the names. So you have to just figure out how the names get picked. So.
I think that was what I suggested for the problem. that I had thought would be good.
So I have seen people go back to the job market when they are up to tenure. So I'm just wondering, is this a good strategy? So no matter, those people told me no matter whether they want to stay or not, they just go back to the job market and try to find if they could get offer from other place, they may want to use it as a bargaining point.
You're right. Some people do that. They are trying to get a raise, and they sometimes look for jobs when they don't really intend to leave. I mean, it's a complicated situation. Yes, you're right.
I guess it depends very much on sort of what type of where the institution where you are, and so that phenomenon I'm aware of it as taking place at sort of a certain class of institution, particularly one that seldom tenures people or sort of never tenures people. One thing to be aware of, though, and this is that moving, if you are thinking that you would like to move. Moving without tenure is infinitely easier than moving with tenure. And so one of the reasons to go up, one of the reasons to go on, and you sort of, and it's, the processes are somewhat similar in the sense of you need to get letters, you need to you need to put together a CV, you need to have talked about your research. I mean, so there's some overlap in terms of the amount of effort. And so that's also part of the calculation is if I'm going to be doing this anyway, then maybe I should be also looking for a job at the same time. I think that if you are happy where you are, if the winds are blowing the right way, it's absolutely not necessary to do that. But this very much depends on the sort of place that you are. But if you think that, I recently tried to recruit to Georgia Tech 2 people, and they were getting tenure where they were. But there are a couple, they were getting tenure where they were, but they clearly wrote in their cover letters that although they were getting tenure, they were willing to consider tenure track positions with a short tenure clock, and that made it so much easier to interview them, to make them offers. Now, we ultimately lost them to a place that did actually make them tenured offers, and that was not something that we, for political reasons and the dynamics of my department, that was very difficult to counter. But that what they did was sort of politically spot on in the sense of, I'm getting tenure, but I'm willing to move without it, because they had decided that they wanted to move.
speaking of leaving for another institution, so sometime maybe during the third year or something, you might have to move, maybe because of family reason or something. Would you be like in a disadvantageous situation compared to say, or maybe you just get out of a postdoc, stuff like that? And I was just wondering, just in case people ask you why you move, I mean, I was just wondering what would be a good strategy, in terms of what to tell them, because sometimes I heard it would be hard to tell them, oh, I want to move because my spouse couldn't get a job there or stuff like that. So I was just wondering what kind of advice you guys have in terms of that.
I think just regardless of the time you move, they're going to look at your track record, and so I don't know that it's necessarily harder. It looks bad if you stay too short a period, like you're leaving after a year or something. Maybe people really question. I don't know. I sort of often cop out and blame my husband for things, So, so if somebody asks me if I'm interested in a position, oh, my husband wouldn't move, or and make up different things for him, but just abuse him thoroughly. But I think often, an excuse of family, like there are better opportunities for my spouse somewhere. That can be good, but then that might make them less likely to try to retain you, And so if your goal is to get a raise where you are, or to have more, more comfort in your own position, then you don't want to lead them to believe that your husband won't stay anyway, So, I think from the chair's perspective or from the department's perspective, I think they'd like to know what's going on, because I think they'd like to be helpful, a lot of the time. So if they think you're worried about getting tenure, maybe they want to help you get tenure, before you leave, or but I don't really know that the third year, right before tenure, like the fifth or sixth year, I think people are suspicious that you think you won't get tenure, and so I definitely think as it gets late, that starts to look like, oh, you didn't cut it at place X, and so you'll need to have a good rationale for, well, I'm interested in place Y because I think it's a better fit for my skills, as opposed to it's a slightly worse university than the one I am now. But otherwise, I don't think the timing's that.
Yeah, so sometimes if you are like interviewing at a new institution, they might ask like why you want to move like out of your like current institution. So I don't know whether it's wise to tell them, oh, I move because of my spouse or family reasons.
I don't think there's anything wrong. They can't ask you if you're planning to have kids, or as long as they're not asking you an illegal question. I think it's good to be able to say you're happy where you are and you like your job and you like your colleagues, but my husband does financial trading and we need to be in New York, or
Thanks.
That's very reasonable. But you should also have something positive that you can say about the place that's in. I mean, you can say I started looking. I started looking for a job because my husband works in financial trading, and so we decided that we needed to relocate to New York. But once I was looking at your website, I realized that you have this wonderful program in blah that I would really fit well in, and I noticed that you need somebody to teach this course that I've previously developed. I mean, you can mention like personal reasons as a motivation, but you quickly want to redirect the conversation to professional ones. Julia.
Yeah, I mean, I'm all for being as honest about everything as possible. So I wouldn't. You're going to be working with these people, so they'll know in the end. But so definitely be honest. But like you said, you want to have a good reason why this is a wonderful university, and of course I would love to join your faculty here, and come up with something that would make you. This is why I am the right fit for this job. So definitely be professional, but I would be honest about the other reasons, as long as the other reason wasn't I was bombing at my other job. Right, I mean, but if you have like real life reasons, people understand. Right. Thanks.
I mean, even when you're interviewing for your first tenure track job, or they'll ask you, why would you want to come to this college? Why would you want to come to this university? They'll ask you that. I mean, so you... No, it's slightly different, but you still have to have a reason. Like at that time, it doesn't have to be a family reason, but it can be, what features of this college or this university are positive to you, and also how you can contribute to this particular university. So you have to have an answer for that question, right? So. So we're going to have a quick transition to the next talk. How does that sound? Okay.
We'll take a break.
A quick